really appreciate everyone being here. If you have questions or want to talk during this, just put it in the chat. And you can either put your questions in chat, or if you want to be unmuted, just let me know. Because you know, these webinars don't let us do that until we have to do it person by person. So welcome, welcome. We have a good crowd here. And I'm looking forward to spending this time with you. I'm just looking to see who else here. We have lots of old friends, and I think a new friend or two. So it's great to have y'all here. So we're doing, and this is a series of webinars we've done before, but we think this is really, really important to the system of care, not just for children's mental health, but for children in Mississippi, for all of us to understand these things. And there's a couple pieces of policy and legislation going on that these might relate to. So we just wanted to revisit these and talk about these different structures and what's supposed to happen in our system of care. And what can we do with those things right now to help make them work as well as possible? So for those of you who are not familiar with us, I'm going to go over who we are. And then also for those of you who are, we always like to remind you and remind ourselves of what we are here to do so that y'all can hold us accountable to being consistent with our mission and vision. So Families as Allies is the only statewide organization in Mississippi run by and for families of children with behavioral health challenges. And we define that pretty broadly. It may be a mental health challenge. It may be trauma related to something difficult that's happened with a child. It may be adjusting to another kind of disability or another kind of difficult thing that's happened. It could be an addiction, but just behavioral health challenges. It can be dealing with a special health care need. And as families, we support each other, and then we work together to make things better for our children, including learning as much as we can about the different things in the state like we're doing today. And our vision is that all children, not just ours, will have the opportunity to reach their potential and succeed. And our mission is that families are partners in their children's care. And sometimes people think that means we go around making families do things. That's not at all what we mean. What we mean by that is that the system of care for children in Mississippi will be family driven, that families will be partners at every level, because we know that families are partners at every level, but sometimes the system sets up barriers so they aren't able to. That's not recognized the way it should be. And our core values define us. We value every child and family. So sometimes people ask me, well, who can be part of Families as Allies? If you define yourself as having a child with behavioral health challenge, you are more than welcome to be a part of us. If you have an interest in that, you're very welcome to work with us. Everyone is welcome. We value every child and family, excellence, partnership, and accountability. And you can see there's our information at the bottom. Probably all of y'all are on our email lists, but if you're not, you can go to that email, to that website at the bottom, go to the top to news and click on subscribe to the Ally, and you'll get our weekly newsletter, or you can text to do that. And if you're on Facebook, please like us. These are our core beliefs about families. And all of our trainings reflect back on these, but these are our core beliefs. We believe you as a family member know your child better than anyone. You, not anybody else, not us, are your child's strongest advocate. Sometimes people call here and they're like, this family needs an advocate. And what we think is that family knows their child better than anyone. They're their strongest advocate. They may need some support. They may need some information. They may need some backup. They may need someone standing beside them because it's been really challenging. But we don't think they need us or anybody else. And we don't see ourselves as their advocate. We see ourselves as another parent who's been in their shoes and probably is in their shoes and knows that they are the person who can get more done for their child than anyone can. And this is going to be really relevant today. All of these are, but that system should follow laws and policies about families and children's rights. And we're really lucky. You know, a lot of times you hear about Mississippi being bottom on the list of, you know, different things that happen in states. When it comes to one of the laws we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about a very good one, and we're actually towards the top of the list. We also like to let you know what you can expect in today's webinar so that we can reflect back at the end and see if those are the things that happen. That you'll be able to describe the relationship between Mississippi's system of care and what the law says. You'll be able to explain what a making a plan team is. And you'll have understanding of when and how those MAP teams, making a plan teams, and their abbreviated MAP teams, can be accessed to support families. And you'll be able to describe what families should be able to expect if they access a MAP team. So I'm going to pause there for a minute and just see, are there any questions about any of those things? Okay. Now, we're going to review what a system of care is. And we always try to bring things down to a really practical level. So this is something I think we all know and love. I'm guessing there's not anybody on here who doesn't like chocolate chip cookies in some form or fashion. And I just want you to think about it for a minute. How is a chocolate chip cookie? Well, I want you to think about all the ingredients that go into a chocolate chip cookie. And that's like a system of care. There's lots of different parts that go into a cookie, and there's lots of different parts that go into a system of care. So a system of care is all those different entities and groups that are working with a child and their family, either at an individual level in the community or at the state level, all those systems coming together in a way that works for that family. And with all of them coming together, when you think about it, I'm not showing you a picture of some chocolate chip cookies or some chocolate chip cookie dough. And I'm not showing you a picture of like some butter in one place and some salt in another and some chocolate chips in a different bowl, and they're not even mixed together. I'm not showing you a picture of raw cookie dough. I'm showing you a finished picture of a chocolate chip cookie. What had to happen for all of those? I'm going to let y'all put this in chat, and it may seem obvious, but what needed to happen to take all those different ingredients that go into a chocolate chip cookie and make them come out as a cookie instead of either just different ingredients sitting separately on a counter or even all mixed up in a bowl? What had to happen to make this different? How did we get these cookies? What happened? And if y'all don't chat, I'm gonna call on people. Oh, okay, we've got some good stuff. So there had to be some instruction on how to make them. We had to know, how do you go about doing this? That's a very good point. They had to be mixed or blended together. Very good. You had to have the ingredients. You had to have some flour, some eggs, and some other things. Very good. So they all had to come together, and they all had to give up a little bit of their identity, didn't they? You know, it's not like when you look at a chocolate chip cookie that you're thinking, oh, that's got some really good flour in it. Or even, you know, those are really good chocolate chips. They may be, but they blend into the whole cookie. They all become part of that cookie. And they also had to go in the oven, right? They had to face some heat together. And that's very common in system of care work. We have to spend a lot of time blending and stirring and figuring out how we're all going to work together. And we typically have to face some heat for it all to come out on the other end looking the way it's supposed to look. So those are just some basic ideas of a system of care. Now, some of you have been in our webinars, and I'm going to throw a question out to you. What is one, and so you may already know the answer to this because we've talked about it before. In any recipe, what is one ingredient that is almost always a part of any recipe, whether it is chocolate chip cookies, it might be your grandmother's favorite potato salad, it may be the macaroni and cheese you make at Thanksgiving. What's an ingredient that's in almost any recipe? Very good. Jania's our intern. She's getting an A for today. Salt. That's right. And why is salt in almost any recipe? Anybody got any ideas? Did the salt lobby just decide to get it that way? What does salt do to a recipe? Right, Giovanni, it makes it taste better. It makes everything taste better. It brings together all the flavors. It brings out the flavors. And those of y'all who've been on here but with me before know I will talk about this. It also makes all the ingredients work better. I didn't know that. I'm a bread baker. I did not know until I started baking bread that salt actually helps all the other ingredients work better. Like it helps yeast rise. It does a whole bunch of stuff. So in our system of care work, anybody got any idea, all these different groups and people working together, who would the salt be? That no matter what kind of context we're talking about, the system of care, who all's coming together, who's always in every recipe when it comes to putting things together? Any thoughts? Whether it's at the local level, at the state level, who always has to be at the table to make the recipe work? Right, families. Oh, and I'm so glad, look at that. All of a sudden, like 6 people said that the same thing. The person receiving services, their family. Absolutely. If they're not part of this mix, the recipe is not going to taste right. And you might have something that looks like a chocolate chip cookie or looks like potato salad, but is it going to taste right? It's not. Because that's the one ingredient that always has to be there. And that doesn't mean the ingredient where everybody's trying to get the salt to do what it's supposed to do. The salt knows what it's supposed to do. The salt is just salt. The family is just the family. So by everybody recognizing that they are just as important ingredient as everybody else and letting them flavor everything that happens, things work much better. Now, what happens if you're cooking and you have a little bit of a cut and you're putting salt in something and some of that salt gets in your cut? What happens? It stings. It stings a lot. Probably it burns. Probably everybody's remembering, yes, it stings. The time, like I can feel it on my fingers because just from all the times that's happened to me, it hurts. Now, sometimes that's what happens because when we start actually really partnering with families in a system of care way, it can expose wounds in our system. It can expose open areas in us that we didn't even realize maybe we needed to look at, and it can burn. That doesn't mean that there's something wrong with the salt. The salt's doing its job. But it means that that salt may be helping us come together as a system of care to be like those chocolate chip cookies. Now we did, and we have said this throughout the pandemic. We would, when we were doing all these trainings in person, and hopefully we will be back doing that soon, although we will probably still always do virtual things too. We would bring chocolate chip cookies to these because people would talk about how mean it was to do this and not have chocolate chip cookies. So I owe everyone on here a chocolate chip cookie. All right. So I want you to keep that cookie in mind. And this is an oldie, but this concept has been around for a long time. What a system of care looks like. So the child and family is always in the middle. And with an individual family, we might be talking about something like wraparound in a system of care, whatever services and supports that family wants to help them get those wrapped around them. At the community level, we're talking about, and this is going to be really relevant today, how do all these things come together in a community and wrap around those families in that community who most need the system of care approach? And it's all these different systems along with other people and groups that are important to families all working together. And you notice that all the circles intersect with each other and with the family is all blended. So the family doesn't have to go find this service and that there's not all different sets of rules for every different group and all that kind of stuff. It's a blended approach and it's family driven, youth guided, it's based in the community, and it's based on strengths. So that's what the basic idea of a system of care. But you just notice how it's kind of the shape of a chocolate chip cookie, and you remember all those things about chocolate chip cookies that have to happen. It's about all the ingredients coming together, being changed. It probably had to experience some heat to get that way. Always has to have the salt, which is the child and family, or no recipe is going to work without it. And that may sting a little bit as we go along the way. So, and I know you guys can read, these are the basic values of a system of care, wherever it occurs. And I think, I'm not sure, but I think we may have, I'm looking. I'm not sure, but I think we may have some of our friends from children and youth with special health care needs from that work on here. And we're very glad that you're on here. This language comes out of a lot of the system of care work in mental health, but it's very, very similar to the system of care work in children and youth with special health care needs. And one thing we're very interested in Mississippi is bringing those two concepts together, because there really should just be one system of care for children in Mississippi. It's based in the home, so we want to be keeping children in the home. And that doesn't mean by putting pressure on their families, like you've got to keep this child here because we're trying to not let children into institutions. It means that they have the right kinds of services and supports so that that can happen, both formal and informal. Again, based on their strengths. And at both the system and individual family level is culturally and linguistically competent, that it relates to that family's culture, that broad array of cultures are feel comfortable, that if people get services in the language they desire. And this is really, really important. All of these are, it's coordinated across systems and services. It's not like you have to call 6 different places to find out, well, where can this child get this? And that it should always be connected to natural helping networks. And no, you don't have to answer this. Well, I am going to let you answer this in chat. Not the first thing. I want everybody to think about a time that something really, really difficult happened to you. Do not put that in chat. But I do want you to put this in chat. Who did you turn to during that time? Just broad category of who did you turn to when something really, really difficult happened to you? And we'll see if we can do another one of those things for 6 people chat at once. Okay. All right. Family and God, sister, friends. Okay. Parents, God, friends. And that all of these answers are really capturing what this question always gets at, is people invariably will say, my friends, my family, or my faith. And they may say, a lot of people on here say God directly as an expression of their faith. Sometimes people will say someone who represents, their faith, like their minister, but it's those 3 F's: families, friends, and their faith. And sometimes people will say, like if 10 people do this, maybe one person might say a therapist, maybe more, but it's usually those 3 F's. And I want you to keep that in mind whenever we're talking about a system of care and this natural helping networks. If that's who we all know we turn to, why in the world would we do system of care work, whether it's with individual families in the community or at the state level, and not be setting it up so family, faith, and friends are an integral part of it? And then that it should be data-driven and outcome-oriented. So we should be able to tell if it works. And families should be deciding on the outcomes, like how, and then youth who are, able to determine what they want the outcomes to be. Did families get what they want? We're going to talk a little bit about what family-driven means, because that's the first principle. means families have primary decision-making role. It doesn't say they get to be there or they get to sign something. That they primary decision-making role in the care of their own children. And then this is going to be important for today, as well as the policies and procedures governing care for all children. So families should be at every policy table. They should be there when programs are being decided and have input into all of these things we see at the bottom. And that should be either for their own child or for all children in their community or in their state or nation. And we didn't just make that up, although I think, we'd be really proud if we did. That's from the Federation of Families, which is our national organization. But this is also the definition of family-driven practice that's accepted by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. So if you get money from SAMHSA, if you're a mental health provider, this is the definition they use. It's also the definition that HRSA uses for children. Well, it's very similar to the definition that HRSA uses for children and youth with special healthcare needs. And that, interestingly enough, their definition also incorporates that these things should be paid for by insurance, but the values are very similar. These are some guiding principles of family-driven practice, and we're just, for the purposes of this, we're going to look at number 5, providers, agencies, and systems take the initiative to change policy and practice from provider-driven to family-driven. So we really are going to talk about MAP teams, but I want you to keep all these things in mind when we start talking about MAP teams. That MAP teams and the other things we're going to talk about in the System of Care series are going to start, if they're working the way they should be, they're probably going to start putting some pressure on the system to change from being provider-driven to family-driven. And when we start seeing that, what we're looking for is for the providers, the agencies, and the state systems to take the initiative to change policy and practice from provider-driven to family-driven. And I'm going to actually give y'all a couple of examples of that at the end and get your input. So we've seen a whole bunch of words. But again, we like to give you examples that will help you remember what these concepts mean. And some of y'all have done this before, but we're just going to review it real quick. When you get in your car to go somewhere, I want y'all to put into the chat, what do you know when you get in your car to go somewhere? Who's going with you? Where you want to go? If you got a safety person here, to put on your seatbelt, so you want to be safe on your journey and that your car can get you there. Okay, all very, very good things. When you think about those things, that's what family-driven means. Those same things are what families know. When they get on their journey with their child, they know where they want to end up. And that's one of the questions that is probably the most logical to ask families that often never gets asked is, where do you want to end up with your child? A lot of times, a lot of assumptions are made. Oh God, I got to look back at the chat to make sure I don't miss any of these. And then what is going to help that family feel safe? What's going to help them feel like they're safe, that they have their seatbelts on, that the airbags are going to work on their journey? Are there things they're worried about safety-wise? And what could help them? Like crisis plans. What do people need to get through the crises with their children? And that people want to know that as they're going on that journey, that they really can get to where they want to go. So what supports do families need to make sure that they really can get to where they want to go with their child? And who do they want to help them? And if it doesn't, if it ends up looking like we're not going to get to where they thought they wanted to go, what can we put into place to be there for them? So that's a pretty easy way to remember what family-driven means. Sometimes, and I'm not thinking that anybody on here thinks this, but we hear some different definitions of family-driven, like people feeling they're very driven by their concern for families, and that motivates everything they do. that might be something that makes you helpful, but that's not exactly what we mean by family driven. We also hear things about, well, we need to teach families how to drive their own car. That's not what we're talking about. We're not talking, because that's still kind of communicating the assumption that you might think that you know what that family needs more than they do. It's about finding out what they want where they are right now. And they may just want to go halfway around the block. And that's all they want to do. And it means accepting that. So, okay. So if families are driving their cars, sometimes, and I think somebody put this in the chat, you know, knowing how they can, they might need some help, knowing what the options are for getting from one place to another. And I know we probably, if we've got any really young people on here, they may be like, what is this? Because we all use our phones now, and not that many people look at maps anymore. But a map, and that's what we're going to talk about, the map team, helps a family get from where they are to where they want to go. And you see, there's not just one route. So they can find out about different options with a map team and decide how they want to get from where they are to where they'd like to be. So that's a role that map teams play. So we're going to look a minute. I told you there's a good state law about Mississippi's system of care, and it talks about map teams. And it was House Bill 1529, and it passed in 2010. And as we go through this, probably you're going to say, you know what, there's stuff in this law that we're not doing. And that's true. We're getting closer to doing it. And another reason we wanted to have discussions like this is so that everybody can think together, like, how do we get closer to making all of these things, some that might be close, some that might be far away, to working the way they're supposed to in the state law. So the law says, this is our state law, that the Mississippi statewide system of care shall be, so it's not like, well, if we want it to be this way, if we have enough money, or for the families that seem like they're going to cooperate, it just says it shall be child-centered, family-focused, family-driven, youth-guided, in the community, and culturally competent and responsive. So that's a state law in Mississippi. So family-driven practice is a state law in Mississippi. And the purpose of this law, and this might sound like some big words, but it actually makes sense. Let's look at the bolded part, is to provide for the development, so to create, implement, and the oversight of a coordinated interagency system of necessary service and care for children and youth called the Mississippi Statewide System of Care. So it's for children up to 21 with serious emotional or behavioral disorders who require services from, and there's kind of a typo, multiple services and multiple program systems. So this isn't, we're not talking about children who might just need some therapy for depression. This is for children who have been diagnosed or could be diagnosed with a serious emotional disorder, and who need services for more than one system. So like a child who benefit from mental health support and is also having problems at school, might also be in the juvenile justice system, and who can be successfully diverted from inappropriate institutional placement. So they can be kept in the community instead of going to a psychiatric hospital, a psychiatric residential treatment facility, or ending up in the youth court system. So that's who all this is meant to help. That's who MAP teams are meant to help. So how do people access the system? We really need a place that's kind of one call, that's all, right? And that is what MAP teams are supposed to be. That place where a family can go to in their community if their child's at risk for coming out of the home maybe due to being at risk for going into the youth court system, and they're a child who has a serious emotional disturbances involved with more than one system. And if they are on their way to youth court, they probably are because they have a mental health challenge, also being involved in the youth court system. Or if they're at risk for going to a psychiatric hospital or a psychiatric residential treatment facility. So this is what that same law says about MAP teams. This is what the fundamental thing that MAP teams are. Well, there's two things. And we're going to kind of put A teams to the side because that's a similar team that can function in the juvenile justice setting. This is what MAP teams do. They'll facilitate the development of an individualized system of care program for the population targeted in that section we first read. So that means in their community, they're developing that system of care for these children. That's a pretty big task, isn't it? And what that MAP team is supposed to do, and this is what the law says. Again, see shall. Up here we see will. It's not like will, if this seems like a good idea and there's enough time. We've got will and shall. And this is in Mississippi state law. It's not just somebody thought this was a good idea. Somebody thought this was a good idea and it got passed into law. And I've been around long enough that I worked on this legislation. I was just a helper, but it was fascinating to watch. And it was worked on it was introduced and worked on, and it passed, and then it got strengthened over a 10-year period. Shall, listen to this. They're supposed to shall serve as the single point of entry and re-entry to make sure that comprehensive diagnosis and assessment occur, and shall coordinate needed services through the local MAP team and the A team members and local service providers for the children named in that subsection. So that's for those children who need more than one system, have serious emotional disturbance, and are at risk for coming out of the home. It's any child in that community that MAP team serves that might fall into that category. And that MAP team is supposed to be the single point of entry. So when these children come to the attention of the system, it is supposed to be that MAP team where families can go. And re-entry means, like, if a child does come out of the home, let's say they go to a hospital, psychiatric residential treatment facility, or youth court to end up in detention, that it's that MAP team they come back to, because all those system of care partners should be on that MAP team to support that family in, first of all, keeping the child in their home, and then if they do come out of the home, coming up with a plan that meets the needs of that family. Okay, I'm going to pause there and just see if anybody has any thoughts or questions, especially about if you have, like, if you're on a MAP team, if you had an impression of MAP teams, how is this matching up with your experience and what you know about MAP teams, the things I'm saying. And I'm going to sit for a minute and see if any of y'all have any thoughts. It has not been one-stop shopping. So that's been kind of a hard thing for the MAP team to be. Okay. Any other thoughts? That it can get there, I agree. Yeah, and that's something we want to talk about, save our last few minutes for, is how do we get from where we are to where we want to be? Okay. Now, we're going to talk for a minute because this is a big job to get done. That's huge, to develop a system of care in each community that has, that's working like a chocolate chip cookies, and all those things are happening, and those values that it's supposed to run by, all those things are happening. That's a huge deal. And to be the single point of entry for these children, and this is any child in that area. It's not just who that mental health center serves. It's any child that comes to the attention of the community. It's a lot this law is describing. So who oversees the MAP teams, and who should be helping them with all this? So again, this is what the law says. The Interagency Coordinating Council for Children and Youth, and many of you have heard that abbreviated as the ICCY, which is a terrible acronym, but that's what it's got. And the Interagency System of Care Council, and that's the ISOC, shall work to develop MAP teams statewide. And again, that will serve to become the single point of entry for children and youth about to be placed in out-of-home care for reasons other than parental abuse and neglect. The Interagency Coordinating Council for Children and Youth shall facilitate monitoring of the performance of MAP teams. So she'll be looking, remember we talked about things should be outcome-oriented, data-driven. That ICCY should be looking and saying, well, is this working? And if not, what do we need to do? And the ICCY and the ISOC shall be ensuring representation from their systems on the MAP teams. So I think we have a couple of MAP team coordinators on here. So if you've been like beating your head against the wall, trying to get all those agency partners at the table, one reason that's been so hard is maybe you, and I'm on the ICCY, maybe you should have had more support and backup from that. And then ensuring representation on the MAP teams, funding, data collection, and referral of children to MAP teams. So it's that ICCY and ISOC that are supposed to be overseeing the MAP teams and helping them do all these things. Now, I've already said I'm on the ICCY, so you can say whatever you want. Because I think we're all aware of challenges. Does anybody know any really big challenge there's been with making all this work, what we're reading on this page? And again, this is the law. And we got another shall in there. It's not like, well, if the ICCY gets around to it, it should really do this. It's a shall. Got a couple shalls in here. Anybody got any thoughts about why this might have been hard? Okay, I'll just go ahead and put this out there because I'm not sure who all on here knows this. And I'm on the ICCY. And I have been since I started this job. The ICCY did not meet for 10 years. It has, okay, it's just not working. The system is not used to working this way. That is absolutely true. So the ICCY didn't meet for 10 years. I'm not exactly sure why that is, but I've had this job a little over 10 years. And that's one thing that I was trying to do, like really work on getting that going again throughout the time I've had this job. And there's just been different things that have happened that have made that hard. And I think there's been resistance at that state level. We did this past year working with the Department of Mental Health, get the ICCY going again, and it met twice. Now, they have to learn all these things and they have to learn what they shall do. And I don't know, I think some of these things are hard for them too, because like I've really been pushing at looking at policies across agencies that would make all this work better. And that can be a hard thing because people might have to give up something or get something. I just don't know, but it's been challenging. So one thing that's happened, I think there is some progress here for the ICCY and the ISOC to move into those roles they need to be. But that does mean that the MAP teams, which never stopped moving, have continued really valiantly to try to do all these things and do what they're supposed to do at the local level without that support from up above them. So if you're thinking about, well, I know about a MAP team and it's not quite doing all this stuff, well, that's probably true because they probably haven't had the support they've needed. They may not have even understood exactly what all they're supposed to be doing as a MAP team. But now the more we get this information out there, the more we can all work on making it work the way it should, where it really is that one-stop shop where a family can come, whether it's the first time their child's come to the attention of the system, or maybe it's the 15th time and they're like, oh my goodness, my child's getting ready to come out of the home. If I don't get some more help and support, that it really can be that one-stop shop. That's what we want to work towards. These are some other things that making a plan teams do. Again, this is right now they're going through the Department of Mental Health. So this is from from their written documentation. And these are the things we've already talked about. They serve this population of children, those who are at risk for coming out of the home or are returning to a primary caregiver in the community from an inpatient acute psychiatric hospital or psychiatric residential treatment facility, or can be from detention, to be that one-stop shop, again, for children and coming through detention, the one place people can call, or coming home from a PRTF or a psychiatric hospital. Let me see something. These are, I'm sorry, this slide got in the wrong place. These are other issues that MAP teams help with. There's been more of an emphasis in the past few years of early childhood. So, like a young mother who's either, maybe she hasn't had her baby yet, or her baby's very young and it's been very challenging. That's not typically what we think of as a MAP team issue. But if she doesn't get the support she needs, because that's very, very challenging when you're, have a young child, either when you're very young, or if that young child is starting to have challenges, it can be extremely challenging. And to put those supports in place so that child can stay in the home in a way that's most going to support their development. And then if there's a house fire or other emergencies that might end up with the family being homeless, MAP teams can help there. And I'm just going to put this out there. I think one thing that's happened with MAP teams, because there has not been the support to really help them become that system of care in the community and be that one-stop shop and that entry into the system of care, that MAP teams have, one thing they have done very well is help in these kinds of situations when there's a risk of homelessness or that type of thing. And at times have maybe become where this has been a primary focus, which just makes sense. And that there hasn't been as much emphasis on those other things about keeping children in the home being that single point of entry and re-entry. Now, sometimes people want to know, how do I contact the MAP team in my area? The Mississippi Department of Mental Health, they have a youth and child services directory. I think this may be linked to their last year one. This is on our website, and you can click on it and it will, I think this year's, it's like on page 11, it lists all the MAP teams, or you can just call the Mississippi Department of Mental Health Division of Youth, Children and Youth Services. Now, I want to, and you guys can either answer this in chat or just unmute yourself. It can be really confusing because there are these services out there that also serve this population of children, but they're services, they're not a process. Things like MyPac and other services that are out there offered by different providers. Do you guys have any thoughts just from hearing all this about how that might coordinate with some of the services that are out there, especially if they're offered by more than one entity? Any thoughts about that or anything else we've talked about so far? And you can either put them in chat or just unmute yourself. Did I lose y'all? Okay. My PAC can be great if it's done properly, and then some providers offer wraparound. Both those things are true. My PAC can be great if it's done properly, and some providers do offer wraparound. We're going to be talking about wraparound, and we've actually got some wraparound experts on here today. So if I'm slaughtering this, y'all unmic and correct me. This law that we're talking about, it also talks about wraparound. And interestingly, it talks about what services should be available. And we'll talk about that next in our next one of these. I can't remember if it's next week or the week after that. But wraparound is a care coordination model. And what this law says is that wraparound should be offered to any family whose child meets this criteria. So wraparound, I think sometimes people, it's just the way things are right now because we don't have all this stuff very well defined. It's like, oh, that's something we can offer to families. But actually, it's something that should be offered to every family. Now, they might say, I don't want that, but I think if it's described the right way and delivered the right way, most families would want it. And it should come before services, because it's a care coordination model. It's a way of working with families to say, whatever services you want, we will help you get those. Now with that, both that and MAP teams, a MAP team should be working with families like that single point of entry, like families saying, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. That's the place they can go. Ideally, that MAP team would be able to tell families about wraparound and tell them about the organizations that offer wraparound in their area, and that all this would happen pretty quickly. And if that family wanted to do that, which I think most families would, because it should just be offered as this is the way we approach these things, then that wraparound coordinator could work in more depth with that family to help them get all of the services and supports that they want, including the informal ones with backup from the MAP team. Does that make sense? And that would be more consistent with the law and what we're doing now. And one thing they could tell them about is MyPAC. And if they wanted that service, they could choose it. But the way this best practices would be that the wraparound would be offered before the services. So that's just, it's a lot to think about. And also, one thing that happens, and I was a mental health service provider for many years. So I'm getting ready to say something that may step on people's toes, but it's something we need to think about with this model. With MAP teams being that single point of entry, with wraparound being offered from the very beginning as a care coordination model, and that the MAP team can let people know, here's how you can find wraparound in our community. And then families would then be able to pick their services from wherever they wanted. Like if they wanted MyPAC, they could be told, like the wraparound coordinator could work with them and they could find out all the places that offer MyPAC. What tends to happen now is that service providers, and this is an old model, it's the model I grew up with, where I grew up as a psychologist with, I guess, that the service providers, these places where children are, either PRTFs, psychiatric residential treatment facilities, or youth court, or hospitals, are working directly with those hospitals and saying, you can just refer them to us. And that's usually very sincere, but that bypasses this whole system of care process that we've got set up. It bypasses the MAP team, it bypasses wraparound, and it's not really functioning consistently with this law that we talked about, or really what we know about best practices. So that's kind of a huge thing to think about. So I'm going to ask you all, how would we know if a MAP team's working? If we were looking at data, how would we know? I'm going to have to call on people. Okay. We got it. Very honest. I don't know. All right. Let's just think about this. If the primary role of a MAP team is to help children who are at risk for coming, all children in that area, to help them if they're at risk for coming out of the home, how would we know if the children are staying in their homes? First, we would need to know, and I don't know if we know this, and this is one thing I've thought about as an ICKY member. I don't think we know yet who are the children who most need MAP teams. I think the MAP teams are doing a very good job right now of responding to the families they're aware of and helping children who probably are at some risk for coming out of the home. But I don't know if the children who are at most risk for coming out of the home are actually coming to the attention of the MAP teams. Maybe they are. But we need to know who are those children and are they staying in the home? Yes. And then look at things like, are there fewer admissions to these places? Are there fewer admissions to acute care hospitals for children? Psychiatric hospitals? Do our psychiatric residential treatment facility admissions going down? That would be a big thing to look at. And that's the kind of thing that ICKY needs to be helping with. And like I said, it's just met twice this past year, but we need to figure out like, how will we get from there, from where we are to there? What might be another thing we could look at? With any other thoughts of what we could look at with MAP teams? Okay, and I should have said this in the beginning. Full disclosure, Families as Allies coordinates the MAP team, how kids get referred. That's a good one. Like, are you thinking like, who's referring them? And would they be the people who would know the children who are most likely to come out of the home? Is that what you're getting at? Just in case you want to type more, I'll leave it at that. Or if you want to unmute. We facilitate who's referring and how are they being identified? That's a really good point. We facilitate, Henry Moore at Families Allies facilitates the Hinds County MAP team. So we're looking at this too. And poor Henry, I'm always like, you're doing a really good job with the MAP team. I don't know that we're really finding those children. Where are those children? Where are those children? So we're looking at things like who's referring and how are they being identified? Are they the people who really know who's about to come out of the home? And then at the ICKY level, I've thought about things like, how do we get the managed care organizations involved with the MAP teams? Because they're certainly going to know who's coming back to the community. And they probably are going to be aware of like who's getting referred to psychiatric residential treatment facilities and acute admissions. Now, with acute admissions, there would need to be a lot of things thought through, because by the time the child gets to that point, if the MAP team hasn't been aware of them, there may be like a level of dangerousness and all that has to be considered. But I have thought about if managed care organizations were more involved, would that help us get to some of these kids? And do youth court, do they really understand? And every time there's a new youth court program proposed, I'm thinking, but what if the youth courts understood MAP teams better and knew that this was this whole group that could be working with them? But I'm kind of babbling now. We have about come to the end of our time. So how did we know we're working? And these are just some things we said. More children in their homes, better support when they're returning if they do come out of care, and then a more visible system of care in the community, all these groups really working together. And then the system of care, as it comes together, changes in response to families instead of expecting families to change in response to it. And then I brought up a couple of things about how do we get from where we are to where we would like to go next? That's a huge question. I'm going to leave y'all with that thought question. To ponder, and I hope y'all will come back to our next webinar. It'll be on wrap around and we may get a chance to revisit this. And we have like a minute left. I will can stay on here a little extra, but I understand some of y'all need to go. I'm happy to. We will get the MAP team meeting for Jasper County. Oh, I'm sorry. Somebody asked about a specific county. That was to me. We will find out that and get it to you. These were what we said we would do. And you can let me know how we did. I'll see if there's any questions. I really, really appreciate everyone being here. I know we went through a lot of stuff. It's a lot to think about, and we're going to keep pondering this law and how do we get from where we are to where we want to go in the next couple of webinars too. So in the next one, we'll talk more about wraparound. And in the one after that, we'll talk about the Interagency Coordinating Council for Children and Youth. And I'm on there, so y'all can tell me how to do my job. And we need lots of help and support. Thank y'all. Thank you guys so much for being here. Appreciate it. And we will probably send you a follow-up survey about what you thought about this. And we will likely ask you about your demographics, not because we're trying to meddle in your business, but we're trying to figure out if we're reaching people fairly as we do, like, is our outreach and how we are in this state, are we making everybody feel comfortable being part of us? So thank y'all. So if you get those surveys, please respond. Oh, you guys, I'm so excited y'all were here. And I look forward to seeing many of y'all again. I hope I get to see everybody.